Well, hey guys, welcome back to the Next Man Up podcast. So good to have you along with us. I am your host, Mark Stanifer. I'm joined by John Gregory once again, and we are honored to be with you for another episode. Hey, if you got any suggestions, comments, questions, feedback, guess what? Our email address is feedback@thenextmanup.com. We'd love to hear from you. John, welcome back. Good to see you again, my friend.
Always good to see you. And before we get too much into today's content, I want to let our listeners know that I have a thank you, and it's to you, Mark.
Okay.
And my thank you is in the form of lyrics. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. So I'm singing that because listeners, I reached out to Mark yesterday and asked him if he could help me with a little bit of a project, and boom, done.
Easy peasy.
Easy peasy.
Today.
Whatever, you're my sunshine.
Okay. You do live in Florida, right? With
yeah.
Oh,
it's quite sunny outside today.
Right.
Yes.
Wow. Nonetheless, I'm happy to be your sunshine. I'm happy to receive your thank you, your singing thank you telegram. And as you continue to do and warned us from the beginning, you just never know.
You don't.
Yeah.
So that was the first thing on my mind.
Okay. Is there a second thing on your mind?
Yeah, today's topic.
It's kind of a big topic,
It is
kind of a heavy topic. This was a topic that you suggested and has been on your mind and heart. And so what's behind that?
Mm-hmm. So in the last month, through two main things, just watching news and also dealing with a request that came into our counseling center in response to a tragic event that happened locally, I was navigating some things, and the thought came to my mind: at some point, a dad has to maneuver what it looks like when their son or anybody in their family really comes up with questions that are really big, but are focused on evil in the world. So the two examples that I'm thinking of are the war, as we're recording this today, we're a little over 2 months in, maybe even getting close to 3 months now, between Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So I can just imagine kids at school, whatever they're being exposed to at school. I have no idea, but whatever they're being exposed to at school about that, those current events, coming home or getting in the car and asking questions about that, man, that's got to land quite awkwardly potentially for parents. Like, I didn't know I was going to have to talk about this with my 9-year-old.
Yep.
And the other event that happened was a 12-year-old middle schooler in our area took their life the first weekend of April. And we were asked to make some presentations about that. A church reached out to us at our counseling center and asked us to make a couple presentations about bullying, because this student noted that bullying had led them to take their life. In the presentations, I was on stage for both of those, helped put those together, and the audience, you could just tell they were hungry, they were scared, they were there were a lot of different emotions in their face and in how they expressed their questions. And one particular mom stood out to me. She has a 5th grader, and I think she came to this thinking she was going to be hearing about bullying. And when she heard, us at least referencing this 12-year-old suicide, it sort of set her off in an alarmed state of mind. It's like, are you telling me that my 5th grader is being talked about at school or is suicide is being discussed at school and I don't even know that? Is that what you're telling me? Because he hasn't brought this home. So there's where the seed got planted in my mind. It's like, we should bring this up. We need to bring up to parents, particularly dads, what do you do when your child faces evil for the first time, either directly, like from a bully, or whatever that is that's happened in the community, or that more globally kind of thing that's not directly impacting them, but they have questions. That's where my mind was thinking of, how do we talk about this? How do we help our dads engage their family about these kinds of things?
My bias as a father was to try to shelter and protect as much as possible. And as a homeschool family, we were able to navigate around a lot of things, to delay a lot of things that other families can't delay because it comes up in the halls and on the buses and things like that. And I'm not suggesting that delaying and navigating around it was the right choice. It ended up coming up later in conversation because we didn't have, for the most part, our kids weren't coming home and telling us what they were exposed to. We were the gatekeepers for much of that exposure. So I think in our family, we were maybe a little naive in how much exposure there is for kids today with respect to evil acts, aggression, singular, plural, global, local. We were just kind of naive at how much exposure there is for kids and how important it is for us to just anticipate that we're going to get those questions, anticipate that the kids are going to be exposed, and to have some sense of what do we do in that moment when it happens, instead of, I hope it doesn't. It's more of, I think, a better approach. And again, this wasn't necessarily my experience, but I think a better approach is, when it does happen, or even say it a little differently, I want my kids to hear about things from me first, and for them to know that there's a safe place with me in the conversation where we can talk about this stuff, rather than me just flying off the handle and overreacting or completely dismissing them and in effect shutting them down, like, oh, dad's not a safe person to talk to about this topic with. There it is.
Yeah.
We could inadvertently communicate that message by our reaction and the sense of, we're not prepared, we don't have the answers, I don't want to talk about this, we're just not going to, and end up doing more harm than good in that moment.
Yeah, and there's so much we could cover here. And we don't have the time, nor do we have the wisdom, to say, here's everything you should do. That's not our intent.
Yep.
Our intent today is to do what we can to make you aware, to help dads, and at least give some suggestions of thoughts and maybe even some intentional steps to take. Because it's possible, let's say your 12-year-old has a phone. Well, they don't have to be in a conversation in a history class to be exposed to conversations. It's right there in the palm of their hand.
Right. It's right in their feed.
Right. It's right in their feed. So they can choose, of course, what they stop and read and all that. But if your kid has a phone, you're probably behind if you haven't already had some of these conversations. I mean, I think that's just the reality of it. And how do you catch up or create some intentional conversation that, what you just said, Mark, helps them to know, my dad does he wants to talk about this with me, and I'm glad. I need to be able to approach my dad about anything, and that includes things that I don't even know how to talk about, didn't even know that I should.
You're making me think of a family that we knew when our kids were younger. They've got a couple boys that were around the same age as my boys. And I was always amazed and a little bit concerned, I will admit, about how much in world events, how open they were around the dinner table with what they talked to their boys about at a relatively young age. And these parents are smart and they're informed and they're well read and active, involved, right? But from a judgmental, sheltering standpoint, I was always thinking they're exposing their kids to too much. That was how I was internalizing what they were doing. And I think today I see the value of being able to talk about those big topics more so than I did back then. And John, I think part of my hesitation was I don't have good answers.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
I don't want to look like a fool. I don't have good answers for where this type of evil comes from, how this type of evil is ever going to be resolved and overcome. And this is somebody who's been a Jesus follower for a long time too, right? Like we can set it in that context as well. But I felt like I didn't have good answers, or I didn't understand the topics enough. I didn't want that burden to be on my kids as at a younger age. And so we just didn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And man, there's so much we could talk about here. So as I hear you say that, I think we'd be remiss if we don't acknowledge something that has happened quite a bit in at least the last 2 or 3 decades. Kids graduate from high school and they go to college and they're confronted with big questions and they don't have answers for them. And oftentimes they choose to not return and talk to their parents about these big questions. So the opportunity's been missed.
Yep.
You know, that 18, 19, 20-year-old is like, well, I'm an adult now, so I need to figure these things out for myself. That potentially, could be their response here. And my parents didn't care back then, so why, whatever. That could be their response. So as much as it has to be uncomfortable, I can imagine it's got to be uncomfortable, but which would you rather have? The conversation with your 13 or 14-year-old that gives you 4 more years when they're still under your roof, or the sophomore who comes home from college and says, hey, declaring, this is what I believe. This is what I think. And I don't care what you think, Dad.
In the context of sex, sexuality, pornography, we've talked about this on the show, about dads wanting their kids to hear it first from them. Like, to your point, kids will search out answers to their questions. And if we don't help them in this context with confronting evil, understanding evil, experiencing evil, if we don't help them, they will go find answers somewhere else. Or they'll be completely wrecked the first time they experience it, and they'll learn that, oh, I'm on my own, or my parents don't care, or they don't have the answers to my questions. And I'm kind of repeating myself, but like in the context of other topics, we have said it's better for our kids to hear it from us first. I think it applies here, like thematically, I think it applies in this situation. Create that space so that as your boys experience the evil that is in the world, that you can process it with them together rather than them going to social media or to their peers or to their teachers or to whomever, or maybe even just carrying it in themselves. Create that space so they can have the conversation or hear it from you first.
So let me give a third illustration of something currently going on that I hadn't really thought of till we're talking here. And I think we should clarify, the term evil is really big. So anything we may mention here, we're not trying to label any particular political viewpoint as evil or anything like that. But I'm thinking of conversations that parents could have regarding the Supreme Court case about abortion that is high on everybody's radar as we're recording today. Man, think about the valuable conversations that could happen in your house that could help establish your middle schooler to know that these are big topics. And one of the first people I want to talk to about big topics is my dad. This is a relevant, it's always a relevant topic, but because of just where things are in the country right now and the heightened emotion around that, there's no doubt, high schoolers are engaged in this conversation. There's no doubt about that in my mind. Because they're about to go to college. So you follow me here?
Sure, absolutely.
This is a relevant topic that I feel that if dads could just say, you know what, I'm scared out of my mind to talk about this if I've not done it before, but I'm going to do some research here. I'm going to do some equipping of myself, and I'm going to create intentional conversations with my family about this as a way to engage big topics such that can get even bigger, like, bully like Putin doing what this global impacting the whole world. He's impacting the whole world.
That's right.
You got to be able to have these conversations in your house.
John, I totally agree, even if I haven't always done it that way. But I can imagine the dad thinking like, my kid is not old enough.
Sure.
Or the dad's thinking, I don't, as we've said, I don't have all the answers. And I think it's important to realize that as your kids grow, they will ask better and better questions, or they'll push back in a more logical fashion, a more rational, maybe less emotional fashion to some of these ideas. But when they're younger, it's not like you're going on stage and entering into a debate for a political position that you're running for. Like, you don't need that level of information and familiarity and command with the topic. What you need simply is some understanding of what's going on, setting it in a bigger context than just Russia bad, Ukraine good, they collided, they're battling, right? Set it in a bigger context for your boy, and create that space to let him ask a question. I remember being intimidated by introducing the sex topic. And I know this is not an episode on sex and the talk, the birds and the bees, but I remember being intimidated. And I think my oldest was 4 or 5 at the time. I was introducing the topic through a book, but I'm like, I'm going to get grilled. We're sitting outside in the backyard. He was more interested in the bugs and the grass and the things to play with outside. And it was a really good reminder for me that I'm not meeting him at a 30-year-old level. I'm meeting him at a 4-year-old level, but that isn't necessarily an inhibitor to engaging the topic. It just needs to be age appropriate.
Right.
And creating the space. Again,
Yeah.
we've used that phrase a bunch of times, just creating the space.
So maybe a way to help the dad approach a topic that is more, all right, I can try this one. The abortion one's pretty big.
It is.
So maybe pull back. I referenced the situation with the 12-year-old. It was bullying. That seems to me to be a topic that a parent should be able to sit in and have conversation with your kid. So that's, if you want to call it a small evil, but to them, that's big. And one of our counselors said in those presentations that one of the best things adults can do for kids is recognize child-sized problems. So get down to your kids' level. What's the child-sized problem for them? All right, if it is bullying, well, we can help with that. We can help them see how to not demonize the bully and address the person more so than the problem. And we can give ourselves we should be able to feel like, all right, I can be knowledgeable here. I can help my son who's either just watching this from a distance or it's happened to him directly. If we're not having that conversation yet, that one we need to schedule pretty quickly. And that could start with something as simple as, have you seen bullying at your school? Just find a simple introductory kind of way to get the conversation started, and it'll flow. I believe it would, because you're giving them the space to talk about that. And then you're also giving them the space, if there is something going on, you now are aware of it. And you can do what the dad should do, in that situation. I think that's an easy introduction, like what you just said, sort of getting into this easier, relatable is not really the right word I want, but just a topic that's more easily navigated. I'll put it that way, from the dad's perspective. And I don't have to have all the answers about a Supreme Court case. I don't have to have all the answers to that. I might need to get there. Well, I'll have to get there when my kid's, a master's level student in philosophy. I'll have to be there then, at least to be able to have the conversation. I don't know. Does that feel helpful?
Yeah. So you're making me think of two additional things. The first is this. So as men and as fathers, we often think of one of our roles as a protector. And as I described, my expression of protecting was more biased towards sheltering. But I think part of what we're suggesting here is you can protect your boy by having these conversations. And not protect him from the topic, but protect him from the lie, the incorrect understanding, from demonizing the person without setting the evil in a bigger, broader context. You can protect how he's developing and growing and building his understanding and experience of the world by giving him some exposure to some of the heavier things of the world. In so doing, you also prepare him to go out and be a warrior in the battlefield against the evil. And I'm not talking about like just going into the military, although that may be an expression of how this is accomplished.
Sure.
Again, setting it in a bigger context, you're helping to develop the warrior in him, even at 10 or 12, to be looking out for the victims who are being bullied, or to be willing to confront and stand up and say, not on my watch, not here, to use their voice to speak up at a younger age, or to take more of more of a career path or a passion path as they get
Mm-hmm.
older, or just creating that awareness that evil is around and we are in the midst of a battle, whether we see it play out in front of us or not. Like part of having these topics is that preparation and building the foundation for that boy to then launch when it's time, and be prepared to go confront, so to speak, evil, or to experience evil on his own at that point as a man.
Yes, and you alluded to some things there, I think, that a dad can hear from a spiritual perspective as well. So I want to not forget to say a couple of things here. The author, Frank Peretti, might not be a familiar author to everyone, so I just felt the need to mention him. If you enjoy reading Christian fiction and you haven't read anything by Frank Peretti, I would encourage you to just check him out. He wrote several solid books back in the 80s and 90s. So if you're a millennial, you probably have never heard of Frank Peretti, but check out his books because it's really good storytelling, but helping you look outside of, back to that horizontal, vertical kind of thought there, that everything that we're looking at on the day-to-day basis, it's human.
Mm-hmm.
There's a spiritual component, back to your thoughts about battle and warfare. There's a spiritual battle that I need to be aware of, and I need to know how to try to educate my children about what that is and what does that mean, which leads me to, man, there's so many scriptures that could be helpful here, but I'll just throw out a few. Psalm 23, when David talks about you prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies, man. Louie Giglio, by the way, wrote a good book about this whole chapter. It's called Don't Give the Enemy a Seat at Your Table. And he zeroes in on this imagery of the war going on around you. The enemies are all around you. And the good shepherd invites you to sit down in the midst of all of that and have dinner. What?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the imagery there is quite powerful and helpful, actually, to us, that all this evil can be going on around us. And it doesn't mean I have to get up and just panically try to figure out the answer to all of it. It may be that God's just inviting me to sit down and let him be in charge of the situation and give me some calm in my life around the evil that's going on. Man, there's so much that could be said about that, but I'll move on. The passage that came to me this morning that I would encourage everybody to sit in and look at from a different viewpoint, and what we're talking about today is actually Acts chapter 16. This came to me this morning while I was running. It's like, what story would illustrate this to me? And boom, Acts 16 came to me. Paul and Silas, I won't preach too long here. Sorry. Paul and Silas, at the beginning of that chapter, they're just out doing what God told them to do. And by the middle of the chapter, they're in jail. Well, there's nothing good about that. But they're right at the beginning of the descriptor of that. What are they doing? It says at midnight, they're praising and singing and just like, all right, this is where I'm at. Their posture.
Mm-hmm.
How do we, this is what I want to draw out here. What is our posture as men when evil is happening around us? What's the posture that I'm exhibiting to my kids when evil is going on around me? How do I invite God into that? And the rest of that chapter, I think, is a great illustration of how to respond to bullying, actually. Because God does his thing, the earthquake happens and the jailer gets converted. But Paul stands up for himself. At the end of that chapter, he stands up for himself against the bullies.
He does.
So that whole chapter, I just encourage people to say, all right, I want to look at this chapter a little differently through the lens of experiencing evil and standing up against it. I'm a little excited about that because I've never thought about that chapter in this lens. And without this conversation, I wouldn't have. So I think those two, I could go on, but those two are the scriptures that I find helpful. And I think dads, you could utilize these with your family and with your sons.
Yeah, I think it's great, John, because it sets the conversation in the context of something beyond what we can see. And I think it can tie the biblical scriptural foundation that we read about to the world that we're experiencing today. And obviously, thousands of years later, but those themes are still there and they're still playing out. So being able to make that connection, set it in context, put us in that context as father passing to son and helping to raise up what looks like healthy and what looks like godly for the man that he's becoming. And part of that is exposure to what's going on, understanding, in this case, the ultimate enemy, and how those enemy tactics can be experienced and expressed all around us. And then how do we engage?
Mm-hmm.
How do we engage with that? And so I think that's kind of like the big theme of the discussion we're having today. And I don't know if you can hear this, listeners, but we're just scratching the surface on this topic.
Right.
There's so many different ways we could go, and we'll land the plane here just in just a minute. But like the idea is, how can you, as a dad, engage in this space, create some space for connection, for conversation, so that your boy can hear it from you, give them a bigger picture of what's going on, and then help them to be able to go out with confidence and meet the things that will come to them, whether that's the 8-year-old or the 12-year-old or the 16 or the high school graduate, whoever it is. Like, we're helping them all along the way. John, any last thoughts before we wrap this up?
Yeah, I'm thinking about my reference to Frank Peretti. I don't recall exactly how old I was when I read those books. I was definitely either a late teen or early 20-year-old. But back to the idea of, did your dad ever have the sex talk with you? Mine didn't. No one ever talked to me about this either.
Mm.
So if you have a reader in your house, I'll just put a plug in here. If you have a son who enjoys reading, give him these books, and that's a potential way, I'll say a potential avenue for creating the conversation. Let the book draw out some potential conversations between you and your son, and take advantage of it, because I'm pretty sure that's why Frank wrote them.
Yeah. And I'll take it a step further, read along with him. So that you're going through it together and enjoying the story, but also as a conversational piece to engage with. It's a good suggestion.
I think, I haven't read them, but I believe he's put out a series of books for kids, like younger kids. I don't know if they're on the same kind of vein topically or not, but it's worth checking out.
Yeah, agree. Well, listeners, as always, we appreciate you being with us and engaging with this topic. It's a big topic. We know that. We will admit we don't have all the answers, but part of getting to better is the dialogue and this expanding conversation. And so wherever this finds you, let us encourage you and challenge you to not shy away from these bigger topics, but to lean in, to provide opportunities for your boy to come to you, to hear it from you first, to get the foundation set from you, so that he can then go out and engage with this in a more confident and secure way, because, well, you've set him on that path, and he knows he can come back to you and talk to you about what's going on. That's the goal. Whatever that looks like for you, we would just encourage you to take that next step. Maybe it's a book, maybe it's a conversation, maybe it's just pulling out the the digital edition of the paper and reading the headline and just having a conversation about the lead story in the paper. There's all kinds of creative ways that you can do this if you are willing to lean into the discomfort. And so we hope you do. That's our inspiration and our challenge of you. And if you do and you've got a good story to tell, email us. We'd love to hear it from you. feedback@thenextmanup.com is where you can get us. Okay, guys, we'll be back again next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. Looking forward to it. Until then, adios. To send us your comments or questions, you can email us at feedback@thenextmanup.com. The theme music is by Jacob Stanifer at Jacob Stanifer Music, and this show is part of the NRT Podcast Network.